when you've never been in a highly regulated industry. But remember, there's several hundred people going up in an airplane,
Yep.
and nobody wants to be in the news in a bad way. So the controls and the documentation required is really important.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Managing aerospace projects is just like solving puzzles. You have many moving pieces, including managing your customers' expectations, coordinating with your supply chain, and meeting the specification requirements. But when it comes to the NPD process, a project manager's job is even harder due to increased risk and the lack of available data to estimate accurately. Estimating and delivering a project within time and budget requires tons of data and experience to forecast all the possibilities where the project is likely to fail. In today's episode, we have our guest, Nevin, who discusses the differences between the aerospace industry's new product development and product improvement projects. She also provides practical insights into how to mitigate risks and estimate the projects to win, but at the same time not lose money accepting those jobs. Finally, she discusses the quality, compliance, certification, and audit processes for the aerospace industry. Let me introduce Laurie to you. Laurie Nevin came from the tech industry and into aerospace 15 years ago to manage programs with budgets from $250,000 and up to $27 million in the commercial, space, and military sectors. Laurie has an ability to adapt to changes in the business environment quickly, which is why she is trusted with the most strategic customers and programs. Laurie was Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance 2020 Women of the Year, is listed on the inaugural 2021 Top Women in Aerospace to Follow on LinkedIn, is co-founder and CEO of Women of Washington State in Aerospace, is a director on several industry and community boards, and has been a featured speaker in numerous venues. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Laurie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam.
Okay, amazing. I am super excited to have you here and to dig into your aerospace background. Aerospace has a lot of complexity overall in the new product development, in the way the suppliers are structured. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Laurie?
Yes, thanks for having me, Sam. So I learned at a very young age to do puzzles and really enjoy puzzles. And as I went into my professional career, project and program management just drew me to it because it was like a giant puzzle, lots of pieces. And when it all went together, we ended up with a beautiful picture. And so as I gravitated towards project management, I found the Project Management Institute and got very involved there. And through my involvement in the Project Management Institute, my network grew substantially. And the last 7 of 8 positions that I've held in program and project management are because of those connections that I made. And in aerospace, one thing we know is the industry, though it's global, it's a very small industry in that connections tend to be connections over and over and over again. And at one time, a coworker became my customer. I've had colleagues become my managers. I've had suppliers become coworkers. So it's a really interesting industry, and I really enjoy it. My current focus in aerospace is new product introduction. And sometimes that means taking over a failing program or a failing project and getting it completed in some way or another, and coming up with the product that the customer wanted. Maybe not the full scope and maybe not within the schedule, but those project turnarounds are a really fun challenge for me. And that goes back to my love of puzzles.
Amazing. Love it. Great background. And I love a couple of things that you mentioned overall in terms of the relationships. It is really the small world. I mean, sometimes you are going to be working with your vendors, and people take this narrow perspective overall in the industry. Sometimes they might not treat the vendors as well. But at the end of the day, it is really that small world. You never know where you might end up. So it's all about the relationship, irrespective of whether you are dealing with your coworkers, customers, or your vendors. I also like the way you think about the project management in terms of the puzzle and creating that beautiful picture. I'm not too sure about that if every project results into that, because obviously the project management is extremely challenging. And we are going to have some fun discussion with your project turnaround. I think there is a lot of learning there overall, and our audience is going to get benefited with that. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest, Laurie, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Well, my perspective on business growth for the SMB, the small to medium business, is to really focus on where my actions add value. And that value is going to have an exchange into the product or the service or the finance of the company. So this is adding value also is an opportunity to eliminate waste. So if I'm continually evaluating my actions and I'm eliminating the ones that don't add direct value into the product or service or into my organization, then let me find a way to eliminate it or create a tool that adds value to that action that didn't before. So I look at growth as where my actions add value. When the customer gets value, whether that's internal or external to the organization, that value generally affects the bottom line. And we want to affect the bottom line in a positive way, right?
Yep, you are so right. And I like the way you like to think in terms of value. A lot of people don't think that way. They simply think that growth is probably going to be getting sales or maybe improving bottom line. But it's really the conversation about value. And if you really think from the perspective of value, most likely you will have a scalable framework that is going to help you grow. And I love the way you tie that back with your actions, which is amazing. So now let's dig into some of the stories of these project turnaround that you have had. And do you want to describe those? And maybe before that, I think you did describe a little bit about the project improvement in the aerospace industry versus the new product development. So I don't know if you want to touch into that, and if you have a story around new product development versus the product improvement, that will set the framework for our audience in understanding the differences between those two.
Sure. New product development or new product introduction is a challenging space in my industry because many times the customer has a vision for what they're looking for, and it takes many iterations of specifications, of seeking out and refining the requirements, iterating the schedule, adding change requests to the budget. And in new product development, it takes being very nimble and flexible. And the leadership team or the executives need to understand that with new product development comes change. We have to be willing to accept the change. And we don't have that crystal ball that will tell us when the new product will hit the market. Now, we might have a target in mind, and we're certainly going to work towards that target. And if we have to keep the target, we will. It just means that we have to be flexible then on the scope and maybe on the budget. Whereas a product improvement project, we have the product and we're going to look at how to improve it. So we're going to evaluate our current state. We might use one of the many quality tools like exploring the 6 M's, man, machine, material, method, etc. We might use 5 Whys and get to the root cause of why we need the improvement or what areas we need the improvement in. And then we'll come up with our current state versus future state and present that to the customer, the management team, the executives, and get buy-in for how we expect to make the improvements. So a little bit different process there. There's still some ambiguity, but not as much with a product improvement project as there is with new product development.
So some very interesting insights there, and we run into similar challenges when you talk about any of the software product developments, right? They are probably going to have similar challenges the way you are defining in your R&D, and sometimes this could be challenging in terms of, okay, I, as an executive, I am expecting this project to be done in $100,000. But it's really hard when you are doing any sort of new product development to, number one, estimate that the way you mentioned that, you need to be nimble and agile, right, with respect to your process. But as a financial executive, if I think about it, obviously there needs to be some balance. I understand the engineering perspective that, we need to be nimble, we need to be flexible with the scope. But at the same time, if you look purely from the finance perspective, we need to have some sort of scope or estimation to identify whether continuing with the project is going to make sense. So I don't know if you have been in any situations where you had to make a decision or the estimation of the project where you are trying to estimate the project, but then you are not really sure whether you can deliver in that money. So what are some strategies that you have implemented to reduce either the uncertainty or hedge the uncertainty?
Oh, that's a really good question, because the bottom line is the finance side of things. And it's on the one hand, we want to be realistic and come up with a budget that reflects what we're trying to achieve. On the other hand, we want to put enough buffer in there for the unexpected. And don't want to put too much buffer in there because then our customer's not going to buy into the partnership of developing this new product with us.
Yeah.
So it's a very fine line. And, this is where some good data comes in handy. And, there's so many companies that have business systems, MRP, ERP systems. There's data there. It's knowing how to mine the data to get a good database analyst to work with me and get at the data, or even give me a connection to the database and let me try my hand using MySQL or something where I can get the data out that I need to make those estimates as close to realistic as possible.
Yeah.
And putting in some room for risks. And when I talk about buffers, I want to be really clear that a buffer isn't an ambiguous amount of time or money. It's based on risk. So if we think the product we're creating with a new technology is going to fail in any way, what way is that? And we might use the 5 whys and get down to, let me tell you, this one company I was with, we were developing a new product for the aerospace industry, and it was for the airplane cabin. And we were developing lighting with LED technology. So LED technology in the cabin was new at the time. So when we developed the budget, we realized that as we drilled down, it was really the circuit boards where our greatest risk was. The LEDs themselves, not a problem. The voltage, the translucence, the color of the LEDs, that was all pretty well established in other industries. But to get a circuit board to qualify in the aerospace industry as a new product, that was going to be our biggest risk. So we associated costs along with that risk. And there's some really good tools for risk management and risk assessment that are out there. So no one has to reinvent the wheel, but it's an area that is often overlooked because doing risk assessments and then the risk analysis and then the follow-on risk management takes some time and thought. And the engineers just want to do the work. They just want to design them. And the production team just wants to build the product and gets their hands on the parts and pieces. But it's a really important process that we don't want to leave out.
So you have some very interesting comments there, and I want to dig further into this because there could be some real insight for the listeners who may be exploring either the NPD or the product improvement projects. So obviously we have a lot of different tools there, but these tools, especially when it comes to risk management, they rely on our inputs. If the inputs are not going to be as accurate, the output is probably not going to be as beautiful the way you had described, right? So in your story, when you had this risk related to circuit board, so number one, can you touch on why that was risky? Number two, what have you done from the practical experience perspective? Obviously, you have the tools and everything, but let's say if you are trying to draw the insights from the practical experience perspective, and I don't even know if your estimations were accurate in this particular project, whether you had any surprises during the execution, but most projects, as far as I know, from my experience, they never go as planned. So let's go back to the story about the circuit board. If you have any real insight in building these buffer for the real life experiences.
Yes, I do. So in my story of developing the cabin interior lighting with LED technology, when we realized it was the circuit board that
Yeah.
was our greatest risk, it's because the component, the electronic component assembly, that circuit board, was so small. And, there are small circuit boards out there,
Yeah.
but this was almost 10 years ago
Yeah.
before, now our electronics are getting smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
but this was back then. And so one of the things we did to mitigate risk was the designer of the circuit board had a peer review. And then beyond the peer review, we
Yeah.
took that circuit board to the manufacturer and did a design for manufacturability review. And so many times suppliers are not selected
Yeah.
early in the estimating process for a project or project improvement program. But if we are able to select our suppliers and make them our partners,
Yeah.
then they come to the design review with the mindset of being our partners, and the easier we can make the design for them to manufacture, they will be more successful. Their first pass yield will be higher. The rate of returns for failures will be lower. So it will affect their bottom line in a positive way. So that's a risk that we saw,
Yeah.
and we put a mitigation plan in place.
Yeah, so some very interesting insight there. And I find this really interesting is because we have had a lot of different episodes around this coordination between your shop floor and engineers. In the real life scenarios, when we talk to, let's say, machinists, their surprises are always going to be that, they have the hands on experience, but engineers very rarely talk to them or take their input in terms of the real world scenario, because engineers are going to go and they are simply going to design based on their knowledge, but at the end of the day it has to work in the real world. I have had similar conversations with other manufacturers who are in the vendor side situation. So for example, let's say if they are developing a landing gear or just gear, okay, so if they are doing that, obviously from their perspective, they have been doing this for last 40 years. They know that the manufacturing process, not only engineering, but the manufacturing process as well. But then these engineers will come and they are simply going to say that, you know what, this is my order and I want you to create this part. And the vendor there is going to laugh on the design because he or she knows in his or her heart that it is not going to work. The part is going to break in the machine based on the design that they have provided. But engineers are they did not care to talk during the design process. They did not take any feedback from the people who are running in the field. And just because of this misalignment, there is a lot of financial loss, not only for the company, but also for the vendor. So as you correctly pointed out that, if they collaborated, obviously they can mitigate the risk. But let's talk about the overall estimation of the buffer. So let's say if I could survey my supplier, I could identify the manufacturability of the part as well. But is that enough to overcome any risk and to design the buffer that I would need in my project to overcome these risks?
Oh, no, there's other things we need to partner with our suppliers to help them be successful, which
Okay.
helps us be successful. So some of the things I like to look at with our suppliers is, do they have available materials and components for
Yeah.
what we're asking for? And what's that pipeline look like? What does that supply chain look like? And we all know right now our supply chain is such a challenge because of some shutdowns over the last year. And not only shutdowns, but some businesses actually shuttered and closed their doors. So that's something I've always want to ask. Can you get the components? Are they readily available? Is it a lifetime supply, or are they manufactured on a regular basis? What does your supply chain look like? And, suppliers aren't generally used to hearing those questions from their customers.
Yeah.
But I think in these times that we're in, it's appropriate to ask. And it gives us all confidence. And if we know that something's going to become obsolete and we are working our obsolescence program, then maybe we catch it early enough that we can select a different electronic component. So again, the earlier upstream we make the changes, the later downstream, it's going to be easier and cheaper and faster.
Okay, interesting. So let's go back to some of the other questions that we wanted to discuss, and let's talk about the nuances overall in building, let's say, the complex electronics products and navigating the ecosystem in the aerospace. So let's say if I'm the aerospace supplier, and sorry, not the aerospace supplier, yes, and building the electronics or distributing the electronic goods to aerospace, what are some of the things that I need to know if I want to create a business in the aerospace industry?
Well, there are regulatory requirements for electronics, for software. And so there's the DO 178, there's the DO 254, and those are our federal regulatory requirements that our components have to qualify under. So those regulatory requirements often specify a test of a component or a test of an assembly. Environmental testing, vibration testing, temperature testing. And so when we were doing the cabin lighting project, and again, it was a new product development, we had to take our first builds and subject them to the vibration, the temperature in a thermal vac chamber, and subject those to tests that were required by the regulatory agencies over the aerospace industry. So I don't know the specifics because I'm a project or program manager, but you can be sure that I need to know what the industry requires at a high level, and I need to know what my contract requires with my customer. I need to know my statement of work. I need to know those inside and out. And then I need to track our compliance to those. So we need to have our tools and mechanisms in place to make sure that we comply to the specifications, the regulatory requirements, the contract requirements, and the statement of work. And so there's a lot of tips and tricks I've learned over the years to have a compliance matrix, just like the engineers have a compliance matrix to the engineering specifications. I'll create a compliance matrix to the contract. I'll create one for the statement of work. And then we'll also create one for the regulatory compliance and qualification. So I don't want to keep my compliance matrices a secret. I want to share those with the team. and the team leads. So the lead of engineering, the lead of production, the lead of manufacturing, the lead of operations, even down to the packaging of how we ship our product to the customer. These a lot of times are specified in the contract or the terms and conditions or statement of work. So it's my job to work with the team and make sure everybody knows what's required and that we're complying to it. Because at the end of the day, if we miss complying to something, then we are held accountable. And that could affect our bottom line. It could be a serious effect on our bottom line if it's a regulatory requirement, where it might not be as critical if it was we put the product in a box that was recycled versus a new box. And sometimes that is specified. So we have to know that we're meeting all the requirements.
Yeah, so some very interesting insights there. And I am going to ask you some questions overall related to the compliance, and especially when you have such complex interactions within the ecosystem as well as with vendors. So, for example, let's say if you are trying to build something, maybe landing gear or maybe cabin for your aerospace manufacturing, right? So you are going to have your tier one vendors who are, let's say, supplying to Boeing, and then you are going to have those tier two vendors. So now at the tier one level, obviously the Boeing is going to make sure that Boeing is auditing them all the time. They are going to make sure that the operations are really compliant with the way they want the product to be built. And if there are going to be any deviations, obviously they need to be approved by Boeing because they need to know them, right? But at the T2 level, so when you are working with these vendors, and obviously when you are building such complex assembly, you need to work with a lot of different vendors. So I don't know if all of those T1s are able to enforce the same audit requirement that Boeing may be forcing on tier ones. So have you seen any challenges or trends with the compliance at the tier two level when they might say that, you know what, I'm compliant, but then just because they might be slightly more inclined towards lean or continuous improvement, they might be changing a lot of different operations, they might not be documenting them, they may be AS certified, but they might not be compliant with AS, and they might not be getting audited. So have you seen similar situations with working with vendors? And if you have seen, what do you do to mitigate this risk, if this is a risk?
Yes, there's a significant risk there. So it is important to flow down requirements. And for example, we're building a landing gear system for a company that is contracted by NASA.
Yeah.
So the requirements start with NASA. They flow down to our customer. Our customer flows them down to us because we're building the landing gear system for that. And then we flow those requirements down to our suppliers that are making the machined parts or 3D printed parts or electronic components. So we, as a rule, the organizations that I have been with will only buy products and services from suppliers that are certified to the AS 9100 Rev D, as in David today, and that is the aerospace quality standard. And if an organization is AS 9100 certified, it means they are audited on a regular basis by an independent third party, just like the organizations I work for or have worked for. We get audited by an independent third party on a regular basis in order to keep our certification. And that doesn't mean that there's going to be an escape, and that can happen. So, for example, on those electronic circuit boards for the cabin lighting I was talking about earlier, well, turns out there's a coating, a conformal coat used over the circuit board to adhere and to prevent corrosion. And there was an escape because the conformal coat had not been tested, or the test results did not get approved for that conformal coat. So it was a significant delay while we waited for our supplier's supplier to get the proper testing completed and the results verified and validated. And then we had to communicate that escape to our customer, who had to report it to their customer. So it's communication and the chain of communication and the documentation of that chain is so important in aerospace.
Okay, so when we look at this whole change process and the approval process, so let's say if I'm running a machine shop as tier 2 vendor and I am working with tier 1, I may not have as much experience overall serving aerospace, and I am trying to figure this out. I somehow got the certification, and I'm not sure who is supposed to be driving the requirement for the audit. Is it going to be done? Should I be calling somebody to do the audit to maintain the certification? Am I going to get some sort of letter that I need to get audited to be able to maintain my certification? But overall, when we look at this whole change and approval process, can you talk about what is allowed when we look at the entire product, the entire assembly, in terms of, can I replace some of the materials? Can I change some of the operations? What is allowed and what is not allowed overall from the approval process?
Okay, so the first half of your question, the AS 9100 quality standard certification, when it's due to expire, it's up to the organization that holds that certification to schedule and to contract with an independent third party to get their audit done and to get recertified. And there are organizations that are in turn certified to perform the audit and certified to recertify an AS 9100 organization. So it's highly controlled, which is good. It's good. It takes getting used to when you're not, when you've never been in a highly regulated industry. But remember, there's several hundred people going up in an airplane, and nobody wants to be in the news in a bad way. So the controls and the documentation required is really important. And the second half of your question, as far as what can change, when we give a supplier a specification to machine a part for our landing gear systems, it must meet all the specifications, from the material used to the inside diameters, outside diameters, the tolerances of the dimensions, all the part marking, and again, packaging. So if it's specified, it must meet the specification. Now, if a supplier wants to come to us and request a deviation, there's a process for doing that. It may mean that we can approve it if it's something small. If it's something that's not so small, we may have to flow that deviation up to our customer. So when we look at changes in the aerospace industry, there's major and there's minor, and majors and minors are broken down even further. And so if it makes the form fit and function, of the specification, but it deviates in some way, then that might be a minor. If it's a something that doesn't meet the form, the fit, or the function, then it's going to be a major. And so with most changes at my level, tier 2, if it's a major, it needs to flow up to my customer to get approval.
Okay, so the changes that you mentioned, they are primarily related to the output or the part that you are building. Are there any guidelines or in the specifications whether I am building this part in machine 1 versus machine 2? For example, I'll give you a scenario. So I'm running my shop and I have one part I was building, something happened in my machine 1, I go to my machine 2. So as long as I am meeting those specifications overall from the output perspective, from the product perspective, do you guys care from the specification perspective which machine is doing the job?
Oh, I have to say maybe. In most of the work I'm doing today,
Yeah.
with machined parts, as long as the supplier can prove that their equipment has been calibrated, which is required by the AS 9100 quality standard, and we're okay with them changing. In the instance of a product improvement project that I was working on for a cursor control device that the pilot used, we could not change machines unless the new machine that we're changing to was approved by our customer. So the customer wanted that much control. And so when we found that this one operation was a bottleneck and was causing our output to be reduced, then we went to our customer and we said, okay, we want this other machine and these other technicians that run the machine to be qualified for the cursor control device. And so we had to go through that process, and the customer had to audit our records on that machine and audit the training records of the technician to give us their okay to implement that other machine.
Interesting. So I am going to have one more question related to the audit, and that is going to be around, you mentioned that when the certification expires for AS, then they are supposed to be scheduling the visit for the auditor. So is that an optional step? Is that a mandatory step? Is that tracked anywhere? Who's responsible for tracking that?
So our quality manager is responsible for scheduling the audits. And she's also responsible for scheduling internal audits. So though internal audits are not as highly specified, it does an organization good to audit our own processes, our own people, and our own procedures to make sure that we're doing what we say we do. Because when it comes time for the independent audit, we feel confident that we won't have any major findings. And one of the things I've learned in aerospace is I'm often chosen by the quality manager to be involved in the audit of the project management processes because I'm a stickler for documentation of what my projects are doing, where they're at, and what the look ahead is. Because it's such a big puzzle with maybe 3,000 piece puzzle, I want to know when I'm looking for that one piece of the puzzle that's got a picture of somebody's right hand that needs to go into the puzzle. I want to know where to find it. And so the audit is similar. If an auditor is asking me where my risk register is and where I'm at with mitigating and managing those risks, I need to be sure that my risk management tool is always up to date and is documented well: when the last time we met, who was attended, what was discussed, and where we are with our mitigation plans. So it's a lot of fun for me to be audited. And not many people can say that, but I can say that because I love doing puzzles, and
Yep.
I know right where the pieces are when I need them.
Yeah, and I can sense that, to be honest. I mean, the passion that you have for puzzle and the complex pieces, I guess we all need to love our jobs. So I am going to have one more question overall. So I'm actually going to give you a scenario of, let's say, if I'm getting my car registered. If I am doing that, then I am required to have the inspection report that the car is inspected before I can get my license plate renewed on the car, right? Because that is actually mandated by the state. Do you have the similar requirement in case of AS certification, that you are not going to get AS certification unless you are going to produce a report for the audit? It seems like it's an optional step that can be skipped by people, I guess.
Well, there are requirements of the AS standard. And so when we're audited, if there are findings by the auditor, they're determined to either be major findings or minor findings. And they could be in the area of sales, operations, project management, risk management. So when the auditor concludes, they determine by how many major and minor findings whether the certification is renewed or the renewal is delayed until the findings are taken care of and closed out.
Okay, amazing. That's it for today, Laurie. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or advice?
I do. For your audience, I think it's very important that when they look at a project or a program that's being managed, there are so many processes involved in managing a project, whether it's new product development or a continuous improvement project, a product improvement project. There's 42 processes. What's important to remember is we use the project management processes where it's appropriate, and knowing which processes to use comes with experience, and it's a function of risk. And that's really important, that last part. What processes we use to manage a project is a function of risk. The higher the risk, the more costly and likely that risk is, then we want to implement more processes to protect ourselves. If we're doing a small project and the risk is very low, then to do all 42 processes is certainly not going to be necessary. So get a project manager with experience who knows how little or how many of those processes to put in place.
And my personal takeaway from the conversation is going to be, any of the processes, especially in the regulated industries such as aerospace, are never going to be fun. But when you are thinking about these processes and compliance certifications, think about the 100,000 people are flying on the plane, and one of them could be your relative. So these processes are designed to protect us. So mean it when you are working to implement, not simply checking the box. On that note, Laurie, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Thank you, Sam. It's been really fun to articulate my ideas and my experience for you.
Thank you, Laurie. I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Laurie, connect with her on LinkedIn directly. She encourages women to join Laurie's Women of Aerospace group, whose in the community support your ambitions for continuous professional growth. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Angela Thurman, who discusses the process for supplier capacity and quality planning. Also, the interview with Mark Evans, who discusses the manufacturing and engineering processes of a Boeing supplier. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.